Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. What exactly are the outcomes of the U.S. President Donald Trump's meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin? And what is the way forward for Ukraine? These are questions we're hoping our guest on the program, geopolitical analyst and security and risk management specialist Onyekachi Adekoya, can help us answer as we delve into details of their meeting on Friday in our conversation. And that's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. We'll check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles and be right back.
The Nigerian government has rejected the designation by a Canadian federal court of some of the nation's political parties as terrorist organizations. The declaration was in pursuance of a case involving a Nigerian man identified as Douglas Ehareva, who had arrived in Canada in September 2017 and applied for inland refugee status under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act of Canada. A statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the classification is not only reckless but constitutes an unacceptable interference in Nigeria's internal affairs and democratic processes. The statement further reads, Nigeria is a sovereign nation with a robust legal and constitutional framework governing political activities. Our political parties operate within the ambit of the law and are integral to the country's vibrant democracy. To associate legitimate political entities with terrorism without credible evidence is a grave misrepresentation that undermines Nigeria's democratic institutions and could incite unnecessary tension. Twelve Nigerian trapped workers in the Central African Republic have narrated how their Chinese employers sexually abused them as they worked for the miners there. The 12 are back to Nigeria thanks to the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. Their leader, Igorigo Freeborn, said it is important for the world to know that despite owing them 11-month salaries, they were sexually abused by their employers. NIDCOM Chairman CEO Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Erewa condemned the act as inhumane and assured them that the matter will be pursued to ensure justice is served in line with the citizen diplomacy of President Tinubu. The returnees were given sums of cash for their upkeep.
But some of us were homosexually molested by Chinese. Let me repeat it.
In Bangui?
Yeah, in the site there. And they are in Nigeria now, and they were unjustly relieved of their duty when they complained.
We're going to be working with you to pass that message across to every Nigerian. This is a warning and a lesson for everybody. So like I said, we're going to be sending something to all your accounts on behalf of us here. And I'm sure there will be many more Nigerians who will be willing to help you. We'll get you that help through them. We'll get all your account numbers individually and make sure you have something to keep you going until the next job comes and your compensation is paid.
Thank you.
And finally, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuga, has commended the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission for its exceptional work in promoting diaspora engagement, describing the act as critical to the implementation of the Tinubu administration's 4D agenda. He says the framework is a strategic blueprint to address Africa's pressing challenges, from strengthening democratic institutions, driving industrial growth for economic and food security, to harnessing demographic potential through targeted partnerships, which recognizes the indispensable role of NIDCOM.
Welcome back. Residents of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, have lowered their expectations for the meeting between EU leaders and the US president at the White House on Monday. This after President Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks on Friday in Alaska. We hear from Trump's special envoy that President Putin agreed to robust security guarantees, including a potential NATO-style defense arrangement. No details have been given as to what that would entail, but perhaps there is more we can glean from that meeting on Friday. European leaders must challenge the US President Donald Trump over security guarantees, says French President Emmanuel Macron. Speaking ahead of the meeting between leaders on Monday, He says leaders will challenge Trump on how far he's willing to go in terms of security guarantees for Ukraine, and for them to remind the US president of what unites the US, Ukraine and the EU. Expected at the meeting on Monday are the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, French President Emmanuel Macron, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In the meantime, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been discussing the outcome of his meeting with President Trump, with the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The talks were said to have been detailed. Putin's meeting with Trump has been described as the meeting the world was waiting for. During a press conference before they went behind closed doors, the Russian president warned Kyiv and Europe not to torpedo progress made in resolving the Ukrainian conflict.
Знаете, понимаете, одним из центральных вопросов стала ситуация вокруг Украины.
There must be consideration for all of Russia's legitimate concerns, and a fair balance in the sphere of security in Europe and the world as a whole must be restored. I agree with President Trump, as he mentioned today, that undoubtedly Ukraine's security must also be ensured. Of course, we are ready to work on this. We hope that our understanding will bring us closer to this goal and open the way to peace in Ukraine. We expect that this will be received constructively in Kyiv and European capitals, and that they will not throw a spanner in the works. We expect that there will be no attempts through provocations or behind-the-scenes intrigues to torpedo the emerging progress.
Но при этом мы убеждены, что
The Russian president said Russia and the US could work together to end the conflict in Ukraine, and that both leaders agree there would have been no Ukraine conflict had Trump been president in 2022.
баланс в сфере безопасности в Европе и в мире в целом. Я согласен с президентом Trumpом.
During my last contacts with the previous United States administration, I tried to convince my former American counterpart that we should not escalate the situation to the point where it could lead to serious consequences such as military actions. I said outright that this would be a big mistake, and today we hear President Trump say that if he had been president, there would have been no war. I think that would indeed have been the case.
The US president paid tribute to the Russian president and his entire team as he concluded the press briefing. He also got an invitation to Moscow.
I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
On Sunday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky admitted he remains in the dark about what was discussed between Trump and Putin in Alaska. He also downplayed the fact that he had not been invited to the Alaska summit, insisting that the discussions were only at the level of words.
Дуже продуктивно. І в гарному сенсі. В усіх сенсах цього слова.
As for security guarantees, he says that can only come from a strong army.
We go.
You allow me, the presidents have a meeting now. Thank you.
Joining us now is geopolitical analyst and security and risk management expert Onyekachi Adekoya. He joins us from Sandton in South Africa. Onyekachi, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, March, and good day to the viewers.
And I think that the dust is finally settling down now regarding the meeting between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. President says big progress was made in the talks. President Putin says he and Trump have very good relations. How would you describe the meeting between the two leaders on Friday?
Amarchi, I have a theory about that meeting. I don't think that the primary purpose of the meeting was Ukraine. I suspect that the issue of the de-dollarization campaign was front and center for Donald Trump. I also sense that some commercial opportunity to explore the Arctic corridor and do some joint investment was also primary. To some extent, Ukraine was secondary. So if the general public is under an impression that Donald Trump rolled out the red carpet for President Putin just to discuss Ukraine, I think that again President Donald Trump has succeeded to suck the oxygen out of global media, and the discussion is now Donald Trump, the U.S., Ukraine, while the U.S. is in a clear survival mode, pursuing its interests. So if I assess correctly, I think that it's a fair and decent meeting for the U.S. and Russia to discuss areas of prospective joint development and opportunities. I think to that extent, a good meeting. On the issue of Ukraine, nothing new was said. The Russians have not shifted position from what was laid out by President Putin in 2007 at the Munich conference. He's reiterated that in 2014, 2022, said the same thing about last week, did again mention a post-summit press conference to still say the same thing. The issues are clear. The Russians want a comprehensive peace agreement. Ukraine wants an immediate ceasefire. The Europeans want an immediate ceasefire. But Russia has momentum on the battlefield. A ceasefire is not in Russia's interest. The fundamental issues that led to the start of the war are, of course, key to the Russians. So nothing has changed, if you ask me, on the Ukrainian front, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity that both America and the United States will be pursuing post the summit.
Well, you might be right on that because the U.S. president did change, his comments regarding the meeting, saying that he would now push for complete end to the war instead of a ceasefire, as the Ukrainians wanted. But I read some of the comments regarding the way and manner in which President Putin was received on the ground in the United States. It was akin to him embarking on a state visit to the United States. The last time Putin was in the U.S. was in 2015 for the UN General Assembly. He also held meetings with then President Barack Obama on the side. The encounter was frosty, but he never met with President Joe Biden. Understandably, they do not like each other. How significant was it that he made the trip to the U.S. with President Trump as president? And, they seem to have had a good time, I would say, on Friday.
Clearly, Amachi, clearly you can see that President Trump is quite comfortable with President Putin, and I think that they share some common understanding. If you also notice in the news, President Trump also praised the president of Belarus, esteeming him highly with some very interesting words. So again, let's not forget that Russia is a member of the P5 in the UN Security Council. Russia is a great power in its own right. President Putin was recently elected, represents the entirety of the Russian people and their aspirations. So it's not out of place for a president to receive a presidential welcome. I think that perhaps where we are asking why did the red carpet come out for President Putin if the ICC has issued a warrant of arrest for President Putin. Again, remember that America is not a signatory to the ICC. It doesn't really, and if it were, perhaps the US leaders themselves will be on that list. Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu is on the ICC list. He's also made some visits even to the US, and some countries that are even signatories have even also indicated an interest to invite him. So I don't see why the red carpet being rolled out should be a problem, if you ask me quite frankly.
Now, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, did say that Putin and the U.S. president agreed to provide Ukraine with robust security guarantees that he would describe as game-changing. They both agreed that the European Union should go ahead and effectively offer Article 5, likely language, to cover security guarantees for Ukraine. The EU also says that it will continue to the process of membership for Ukraine. I'm seeing all of these moves as, inadequate and probably dead on arrival, because in the end, you still need Russia's approval for Ukraine to join either the European Union or NATO. And according to the Minsk agreement, there is no reason, there is no, no allowance for that. So the meeting they're having with President Trump on Monday, what do you think could come out of that?
No, I think that the meeting on Monday will just be clear. President Trump has the opportunity to extricate the Americans from any future obligation. To say, Zelensky, here is the plan, here is the agreement. Again, when you talk about negotiation, you have to ask if Zelensky refuses the deal, what is the likely alternative for Ukraine and for President Zelensky? The odds are not good. So there is no way Ukraine, having been led to this mad path, will get anything better than what Donald Trump will be offering at this time, which is to freeze the conflict along the current line of contact, cede territory, and be given some security guarantees. What is the best guarantee? The Americans have said, they would not get into a war with Russia over Ukraine, clearly. The UK will be spent in a 2 weeks war with Russia. In 2 weeks, the UK has 66,000 fighting men, not even up to 66,000. What the Arsenal has will not last them 2 weeks of war. Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons of itself. France is a shadow of itself. The Poles may have an appetite to go to war with Russia, but they have no nuclear weapons of themselves. So when Europe says that they will continue to support Ukraine, with what? The Patriot system is dangerously low on stock. Raytheon doesn't have even the jet motors for the Patriot missiles. China controls the rare earths and magnetic market. Some of these components are important to produce some of these missile systems. I don't see where the help will come from. So Russia has never been opposed to Ukraine joining Europe. You do some research, you find that that's part of the previous agreement reached. You can join the EU, no problem, get the economic advantage, but NATO is a no-no. And if Russia is insisting on the promise that NATO and the US made, that not one each to the east, will it move? After Russia ceded and allowed the unification of Germany, and made certain concessions and did some reforms, so Russia is within its own right to say, okay, you can give any guarantees, we can sign to it, can be part of the comprehensive agreements, a framework of which was agreed in Turkey at 2022 before the Europeans, according to reports, scuttled the whole agreement. So what will a security guarantee look like? You denazify, according to the Russians, demilitarize to a point where you do not pose a threat to Russia, you join the EU, but any military alliance is a no-no. So what better deal can, under the circumstance, can President Zelensky get? I wouldn't know, and I don't know where the help will be coming from. So I think the conversation on Monday will be frank. He'll be read the Riot Act, and he has the options. And Trump can very well walk away and leave Europe with his problems, and remembering that it has a bigger fish to fry, and that fish is in the Far East.
Right. And the rest of Africa does still have a stake in this, don't they? Because Africa has been greatly impacted by the war in Ukraine. the impact on food security, the impact even on food imports, on debt, and so on. What position should African countries take? Because I know that a number of them did visit the Russian president, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, and they're also sort of like trying to mediate in a way. I know South Africa is in this war between Russia and Ukraine, but what would be the advantage for Africa in this situation, and what would be the disadvantage?
Well, in terms of advantage, I think you've seen increased energy exports from Africa. In terms of food imports, Africa has been able, it's not as bad as it used to be. Again, nature abhors a vacuum. So where there was a shortage in supply, most countries have had to reposture its own food resilience, as it were, in terms of where it imports and how it grows some of these things. So I think Africa has weathered the impact nicely. Even energy prices have stabilized, despite the war we saw in Iran, the 12-day or 13-day war. You see energy prices did, in fact, after the war, go down. So in terms of impact to Africa, I think it's more in terms of global supply chain repositioning. There's more opportunity for Africa to deal more with Europe, with America, with India, with China, with just about anybody. And if you read the room properly, even in the UN, the African continent has just basically focused on itself and trying to make sense of the current geopolitical space, and looking for what is best for Africa. Who wins or who loses in this war and this conflict really is none of Africa's business at this time. Africa has more problems to deal with. A lot of children out of school, the healthcare system. They talk about the growing inequality between the haves and have-nots, issues of infrastructure, social investment, and clearly you don't see Africans bothering themselves with the war in Europe. Europe has always been a continent of wars, as Africa has had its own fair share. So I think Africa clearly is best served by just facing forward and pursuing its own best interests.
And perhaps Africa always looking to Europe to help with its own wars. The war in Sudan still ongoing. The crisis between the DRC and Rwanda still ongoing. We had the U.S. president a few weeks ago intervene and draw up this treaty between the DRC and Rwanda, and are still trying to settle the war in Sudan. And now, as we close this interview, perhaps you have I don't know, if you were, in the room with President Trump, you were in the room with the European leaders, and perhaps with Putin sometime in the near future, what would you say to either of them?
Amarchi, you've sent me on a very difficult assignment. I don't know how to answer that question, because for the Europeans, my God, I would ask what has bewitched them, really. They've cut their nose to spite their face. Every nation, I think, must pursue what is in its own informed national interest. The euro was a major rival to the dollar, and today the European economy is in tatters. They've, on the altar of politics and ideology, sacrificed what I consider national energy independence, strategic energy independence. And today the German economy is struggling. Most European economies are struggling. The citizens are disillusioned. So my advice to Europeans would be to focus more on what is in Europe's informed interest. And I would say that Russia is the link between Asia and Europe. Russia would always be on that continent. So best they find a way to make peace amongst themselves. To the Russians, well, peace is, at the end of the day, every war will end up in a negotiating table. Peace is always better. So Russia must find a way to live as much as it can, despite its own troubles, peaceably with the European continent. For America, clearly, America has a president that is focused on the real issues. And the real issue is that the US dollar is under significant threat. If the US loses its reserve currency status, then I'm sorry to say, when the US president called Africa, some countries, Africa a shithole, it runs the same risk. If today the US dollar is, for some reason, no longer a global reserve currency, there would be problem. And I worry because in that state, we may have to see a major war, a war for survival, because again, what would the US do with all its military might if its own existence is threatened? I think America must find a way to walk back the weaponization of the dollar, the weaponization of the global switching platform, SWIFT, and walk back the weaponization of trade, and, let's go back to that place where, we all were working for a bigger pie for the sake of humanity. I hope this advice is found useful and it reaches the people that should listen. It's just my sincere hope, Amarachi.
It's all our sincere hope. Onyekachi, you have been a pleasure speaking with on the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's it on the program today. I hope you found the conversation as stimulating as it was interesting. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.